Nobody discovered Shelley Duvall in the conventional sense. There was no audition, no agent, no headshot. In 1970, director Robert Altman was in Houston scouting locations for his film Brewster McCloud. When two of his crew members stumbled into a party hosted by a young woman they found utterly magnetic. They went back to Altman and told him he needed to meet her. She was 20 years old, studying nutrition at a junior college, and selling cosmetics at a department store. She had no acting experience and no particular ambition to get any. When Altman told her she was an actress, she reportedly said, "I'm not an actress." He told her she was. She shrugged and took the part. That was the beginning of one of the strangest and most genuinely original careers in 1970s Hollywood, and the start of a story that would end decades later in near isolation, a controversial television interview, and a quiet death that most of America barely paused to notice. Throughout the early and mid-1970s, Shelley Duvall became one of the most distinctive presences in American cinema, entirely through the work of directors who recognized something in her that was simply impossible to manufacture. She appeared in Altman's Nashville in 1975, in his acclaimed Three Women in 1977, a performance that won her Best Actress at Cannes, and in Woody Allen's Annie Hall the same year. She had no formal training, no classical technique, and no interest in performing anything she didn't genuinely feel. Critics adored her. Audiences found her unforgettable. She was the rare actress who seemed to exist in a completely different register than everyone else on screen, and for a stretch of years in the 1970s, that quality made her one of the most sought-after performers in the industry. Then came Stanley Kubrick. In 1980, Kubrick cast Duvall as Winnie Torrance in his adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. It should have been the crowning role of a career already full of remarkable work. In many ways it was, but the price it extracted from her was something she would still be talking about decades later, and something people would still be arguing about long after her death. Kubrick shot the film almost entirely on sound stages at Elstree Studios in Hertfordshire, England, over the course of more than a year. For Duvall, that year was one of sustained psychological and physical punishment. Kubrick demanded full emotional performance from the very first rehearsal take, and he did not print anything, by his own description, until at least the 35th. For Duvall's scenes, which required constant fear, grief, and panic, that meant crying, genuinely crying, not acting crying, for 12 hours a day, 5 and 6 days a week for the last 9 months of production. She told Roger Ebert in 1980, "I had to cry 12 hours a day, all day long, the last 9 months straight." She said her body eventually reached a point where it simply rebelled. To wake up on a Monday morning so early and realize that you had to cry all day because it was scheduled, I would just start crying. The baseball bat scene alone, the sequence on the stairs where Wendy backs away from her husband wielding a bat, took 127 takes across 3 full days, a number that entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the most retakes for a single scene with dialogue in film history. By the end of it, Duvall's hands were shredded raw from gripping the bat. Her voice had gone hoarse, her eyes were permanently swollen, and she was severely dehydrated. Clumps of her hair were falling out from stress. She showed them to Jack Nicholson, who later said he genuinely did not understand how she kept going. Making things worse, Kubrick openly instructed crew members not to sympathize with her, to deliberately isolate her emotionally on set in order to keep her in a state of distress. He consistently praised Nicholson while saying nothing complimentary to Duvall, who rented a small flat near the studio and lived there alone for the duration of the shoot. "Nobody does that," Angelica Houston, Nicholson's girlfriend at the time, recalled later. She said that Duvall seemed tortured and shaken every time she saw her, and that nobody appeared to be particularly careful of her well-being. Kubrick, for his part, defended his methods by arguing that actors who weren't emotionally prepared forced directors into excessive takes. But the making of documentary shot by his teenage daughter Vivian captured him on camera telling Duvall she was wasting everyone's time, a moment that, seen decades later, lands much harder than it likely was intended to. Duvall's performance, for all the suffering behind it, was extraordinary. She won a Razzie Award for it at the time, one of the more embarrassing moments in that ceremony's history, later rescinded. While the film has since been recognized as one of the greatest horror movies ever made. She said herself, in later interviews, that working with Kubrick had made the performance what it was, and that she was proud of it. Both things can be true at once. The performance was great, and what she went through to deliver, it was genuinely brutal. After The Shining and Popeye, where she played Olive Oyl opposite Robin Williams in the same extraordinary year of 1980, Duvall shifted gears and reinvented herself behind the camera. Through the 1980s and 1990s, she created, hosted, and executive-produced Fairy Tale Theater, a beloved children's anthology series that brought classic fairy tales to life with A-list casts and earned Emmy nominations. She did the same with Shelley Duvall's Tall Tales and Legends. For 2 decades, she was a genuine creative force in children's television, working consistently and building something that had nothing to do with the Hollywood system that had alternately celebrated and ground her down. Then, in 2002, she made a film called Manna from Heaven, walked away from the industry entirely, and moved back to Texas. She was 53 years old and had been working in film and television for 32 years. She was done. For more than a decade, almost nothing was heard from her. Tabloids began running stories. Rumors circulated. People who had grown up watching fairy tale theater searched her name online and found increasingly unsettling accounts. That she had become reclusive, that she was unwell, that something had gone badly wrong. Her longtime partner, musician Dan Gilroy, later told the New York Times that her mental health had begun to deteriorate in the mid-2000s. She became paranoid, he said, and began experiencing delusions, believing she was being surveilled and attacked. A close friend and archivist who documented her life during these years was careful to note, publicly, that the connection people kept drawing between Kubrick's treatment and her mental illness was not accurate. Her condition appeared to emerge decades after The Shining, not as a direct consequence of it. Reducing a complicated medical reality to the side effects of a horror movie was, as her friend put it, both unfair and unproductive. Then came November 2016. A producer from the Dr. Phil show reached out to Duvall, and she agreed to appear without telling Dan Gilroy, who found out afterward. The episode was titled The Hollywood Star's Descent into Mental Illness, and it was exactly as bad as that title suggests. Duvall appeared visibly disoriented, speaking in fragmented streams of consciousness, claiming to be in communication with Robin Williams, who had been dead for 2 years. Dr. Phil treated her condition as spectacle, displaying transcripts of her speech patterns to illustrate her disorder to the studio audience. The promo for the episode set her most distressing moments to dramatic music. There was no meaningful help offered on camera. Duvall later told The Hollywood Reporter she had declined an offer for inpatient treatment before the show aired, a fact the show's publicists made sure to note publicly afterward. What there was a viral moment and a ratings bump for Phil McGraw. Duvall said later, "A lot of people like Dan said, you shouldn't have done that, Shelley." She also said that after the broadcast, McGraw began repeatedly calling her mother, trying to get her back on the show. Her mother eventually told him to stop calling. The backlash was swift and came from an unexpected direction. Vivian Kubrick, Stanley's daughter, who had filmed the behind-the-scenes footage of her father berating Duvall on the set of The Shining 36 years earlier, posted publicly calling the episode appallingly cruel and demanding a boycott. She launched a GoFundMe campaign for Duvall's treatment, though that effort quickly became mired in questions about where the money was actually going. The whole episode left a bitter taste. A woman who had spent decades trying to live quietly in Texas had been brought back before a camera that treated her illness as entertainment, generating controversy that swirled around everyone except the person at its center. In 2023, Shelley Duvall returned to acting one final time, a small role in the indie horror film The Forest Hills. She told People magazine that being back in front of a camera felt wonderful and enriching. In a 2024 interview with the New York Times, she said something that cut through all the years of rumors and tabloid coverage and internet speculation and landed with the clarity of someone who had thought about it for a long time. "I was a star. I had leading roles. People think it's just aging, but it's not. It's violence. On July 11th, 2024, Shelley Duvall died of complications from diabetes at her home in Blanco, Texas. She was 75 years old. She had been found at a party in Houston when she was 20. She had been celebrated at Cannes at 27. She had survived a year on one of the most punishing film sets in Hollywood history and delivered a performance that outlasted all of it. She had built something entirely her own in children's television, walked away on her own terms, and spent her last decades in Texas doing what she wanted with the people she chose. The narrative of a broken woman, driven to madness by a genius director, abandoned by an industry that used her up, that narrative was simpler and more satisfying than the truth. The truth was messier and more human. A woman who had a remarkable career, who struggled with an illness late in life, who made at least one television decision she later regretted, and who died at home, on her own terms, in the state where she had started. She deserved more coverage than her death got. She was worth more than the story people kept insisting on telling about her.